So I've opened this file as a separate file. So you can open up numerous different Rhino files, but that means that you have different copies of the software open. So if I go to the bottom of my screen, you'll see that I've got the template here, and I've got the Rhino, this particular file open on here. So I'm just going to copy this. So just Control C, just like just putting onto a pasteboard on my computer, and I'm going to go to my model space. So just going to make sure it's in the model tab, and I'm just going to paste it into my model space in the template title block. So file. So just make sure you resave it again, so you don't save over your title block. We'll just call it drafting. Okay, so you don't have to do anything, just watch if you can. Under drafting, there is some really useful tools that help you guys out in regards to creating technical drawings. I'm going to select this object, all the components related to it. I'm going to find the best perspective viewport for this, so that describes the object. So for example, if I did this, it's not the best way to show the gallery on top. So I'll probably do a 3/4 view. Make sure it's in the center. So that's probably, I would say, the better view of this to present this particular object. Select the whole thing and click on Make 2D. Okay, this is magic. What will happen is the computer takes what you see here and it converts it into line drawings. We're going to use, on your handout on here, it describes the settings. So we're going to use 4View USA, which is third angle projection. We're going to show hidden lines, part of Australian standards, to show what is behind the object and what's through the object. And down below here, we need to make sure all visible lines goes to all my outlines, and all hidden lines go to my hidden line layers. So what that's doing is, so this software is going to create a whole set of technical drawings for you. It's going to create visible lines and hidden lines, and then it's going to take on the settings that you created about an hour ago. So, you know, all your outlines that you created, the colors, the line weights, the thickness, the dashes, that's in the layers. So you're telling the computer that all the visible lines are going to that layer and all the hidden lines are going to that layer. And when I press OK, it may take. So these lines that it's creating is actually going to be in vector format, which you now can be able to export it, select it, export it, and send it into Illustrator, so you guys can actually digitally render these objects and provide top, front, left views in vector formats. So you can use them for presentations, really handy. Makes the presentation look a bit more professional. So there's your drawings in top view, all created in its own layers. Really handy, really quick process. For you guys, just as a reminder, for note that in your perspective view, you don't need your hidden lines. So I'm just going to delete the hidden lines. To do that, I am going to lock my outline layer. So if I don't have it locked, if I want to select just the blue lines, it's pretty difficult unless I want to go through and select them all. It's easier if I just lock it so I can get access to it. Select the blue lines, hit delete, and that's your drawing done. I tend to actually like to group my views, so I select that and go edit and group, edit and group, edit and group. So technically that is your technical drawing done. All you need to do is now bring it up on your layout page. A3 landscape, do landscape. You'll notice that the 3D object is visible. I'm just going to move all my so it moves all the. So when you copy and paste, it takes on the object's layering system and paste it into your new file. So going back to my original object, these are all the layers that all the components have. So your shank, your stones, they're all part of a layer system. So when you bring it over to your other ones, it brings it along with it. So I've moved them all into my 3D layer and turned off that so that it's not in the way. So that viewport currently is 1:1. I'm going to make it so it's bigger. So that's now 2:1, making that drawing easy to see. You can see the details much better. But you'll see that's been cut off on the viewport. If you want to move your objects, leave them where they are in the model space. Double click, so you can see that currently it's a light color. If I double click on that viewport, it gets a darker color. You can pan, so hold your right click down on your mouse. That allows you to pan your view. So now I'm actually in model space, accessing the model space via the viewport. So I can still click on the objects. I can still do exactly what I was doing in model space, but viewing it through a window. I want to group that. So if I want to, there's a lot of real estate on this page, so I want to just spread these views out. Just make sure you work with your gumball turned on, and we can just drag them up. Drag them across. The reason why I said use the gumball, so just make sure that you're moving things parallel to the other viewports. If not, if this is off to the side, that's not a true technical drawing because these need to align to each other. So that needs to center to this particular view. So just move them in pairs, that's the best way forward. And then we'll adjust and adapt. So it looks pretty centered. There's enough room for me to put dimensions in, and it's the right spacing. Just eyeballing it so there's enough space for me on the left and right side. To get out of the model space, just double click and get back into the layout space. I tend to like to lock my viewports. A common theme or common error that happens is when you're working so close to your object like this and you double click on it and you zoom in, okay, that's where the mistake is going to be made. So definitely once you've set up your view where it's positioned and the scale, always lock it. So when you lock it, what happens is it locks it from zooming in and out. You can still access the model space, you can still move things around afterwards. You just can't zoom in, so you can't make that particular mistake. I think I'm just going to show you guys up to that particular point, and then afterwards it shouldn't take too long to next thing to put in is your spacing rectangles to put your dimensions in there. These little things. And then afterwards, put your dimensions in, and then put your notes in afterwards. So there's only about... Next thing we can do is placing titles. So on each of the views, for me, I like to include titles underneath each of the views just to be clear of what they are. So if you go to your Draftings tab and you go to your text, so these particular titles are going to be in bold and they're standard capital cases, and also they're going to be in or uppercase. So uppercase, bold, and 5 mil. So if you just click in this particular space, just stick with your standard font that we have, using 5 mil as your font size, and just type in. Okay, I like to justify it to the left and to the top. Okay, just make sure we are in the right title blocks. Okay, just move them into your dimension layer. Should have done that at the start. So click on dimension. Quickest ways to get the other 4 would be just copy and paste. So the next step we're going to be doing is placing center lines. So make sure we activate your center line layer. So center lines are there to help create fillets or rounded edges or holes. So for example, in the middle of this particular section where the hole is, we'll need to create a center line. So we're going to create using lines from midpoint. Turn on your center of the circle. So you can't go to the center of the circle to pick up the center point. If you go to the edge, you may want to turn off some of these other smart tracker. Okay, so you can see if I hover around the outside edge of the circle, you're going to pick up the word center. Okay, and turn on your ortho. Do that again, just for the vertical ones. So the extension line on the center line shouldn't go too far out. So you can see on the top it looks okay, but on the bottom it's sticking out too far. So I would suggest you to select that, turn on your control points, grab it, and then just move it up. Okay, so that's your center line for that hole. So wherever there is a fillet, so for example up the top here, I would suggest you put one and okay, so it's hard to figure out where the center of that hole is from there. Just create one here. Can I get you guys to just look on your handouts? So next up we're going to look at doing is setting up your dimensions, or having a set system for your dimensions. So if you're looking in your handouts, your dimensions are really neat. Okay, they're neat in a way where the spacings are all consistently spaced. So you see how the first row of dimensions lines up to all the ones on the bottom, and then the second row of dimensions, so the 4.7 lines up with the 4.7 here, and then the 25.6 and the 12.8 from the top view to the front views all line up in a particular way. So the spacing between each of the layers of your dimensions are 15 mil, and the amount of layers of dimension depends on your object that you guys are creating. So there's no right ways of how many layers you create. It's just the more you put in, the more information you're going to convey to the person that's looking at it. I'm just going to quickly show you how that is all set up. We're going to create these boxes on here. So I'm just going to show you how I do them. I'm going to activate a layer called Do Not Print down the bottom here, because these boxes will not be printed. These are just there as a guide to help you create your dimensions. Okay, so I'm going to zoom into my object, and I'm creating boxes that is touching the edges of the object. So ignore the center line in this situation. So we're going to turn on your smart tracker. Go away. Okay. So the smart tracker, I will show you what it does. So we're going to create a box. So instead of clicking on the so instead of clicking on this part here, I want to click somewhere up here where the left edge of this object and the top edge of the setting is touching. So if I hover over that point, you see there's a white dot, a little white marker. If I click, move my mouse and hover on that corner of the setting, and you'll see your lines now has a new point to create from. So if I click there, that's where my first point of the rectangle is going to be. I'm going to do exactly the same thing, hover above the right side of the shank and the bottom of the setting, and then click there. So this box now is at the maximum edge of the object. The next one, do the same thing, left edge of the shank, top edge of the stone. Do it again. Okay, so if those white dots aren't popping up, you just have to do it again. Your dimension should only sit on 2 views of your drawing, okay? Don't put them everywhere. Try not to double dimension. So if you're telling me the height of this object is, let's say, 25 mils, I don't need to know that same information on the right side. One is enough. You don't need to double dimension. On my drawing, I've just got the top view and the front view, so I don't need anything. There's nothing in here that I need to know that I can't see from these 2 views. In certain situations, yes, that you have to, because on the right side or left side, there may be stuff on there you can't see from the other 2 views. Then you dimension off that, but try to keep it on 2 if possible. So I'll get you create those rectangles on the plan and elevation view first. Make sure you turn on your Do Not Print layer. So the next step we're going to do is, I was talking about how each layer of your dimensions are 15 mils apart. So how do we make them look 15 mils apart? So these are going to be your reference points of where you snap your dimensions to. So the next step is offsetting these boxes. So offset is a command, and the distance to do that is 15 mils. Okay, so you create, so that's your first line of layers, second line of dimensions. Okay, so those boxes are now generated for you to, when you create dimensions, you can actually pull things and snap it to those particular objects or those boxes. Just don't worry if they're overlapping for now. If you look on your plan view, there's the 3 layers are going sideways to the left. what we could do is we can actually move this title later on to actually sitting up snug up the top there. So can I just get you guys to run the offset command on these? So the next part, once you have your rectangles for your spacing of your dimensions, is to now put in dimensions. So the question is usually asked, so where do I need which dimension do I need? You know, how do I put down, and which one do I? Now, if you don't know what dimensions are, like where do we put it down? So it comes back to you as a designer maker and always think about, so what do I need to communicate? So for example, one of the main things are the ring size. So we need to know the ring size. You need to know, if you're making this piece, what is the shank thickness on the bottom in comparison to the shank on the right. Your setting sizes, the stone sizes, all those information needs to be communicated. So your dimensioning is there to indicate that. So in your drafting tab, you're going through. Okay, so the main thing we're going to be using is your lineal dimension. You also have your angles dimensions, your radius and diameter dimensioning. So I have activated your the dimension layer. Make sure the tick is on there. So the rule of thumb is starting from the inside out. So for example, let's dimension the setting here. So the first layer that I'll look at dimensioning is, so I've clicked on your lineal dimension. I'm clicking on that part. Next one I'm doing is the outside, the furthest most point of the setting. So if I'm making a setting, I would roughly know what size it is. Okay, so I'm clicking on the perimeters and then snapping it to the rectangle. Move that out of the way. The next one is the overall size of the ring. So click on the same tool, and then we're going to the next set. Okay, so that's the way of doing dimensioning. You can also go back in afterwards and edit your dimensions. So for example, just to provide information about the thickness of the shank, the rule of thumb is not to leave your numbers or your arrows in the middle. So the same as your lines, you can edit your dimensions by selecting it and going to your control points. F10 for quick shortcut keys. So then you can now grab the control points and you can move them out of the page. So on my handouts, you'll see that these numbers are not sitting on the object and the arrows are actually on the outside of the drawing. The reason is having the objects or the dimensions off that is it's not as distracting. So you can identify what is the object and what is the dimensions. So for example, this line here, you'll see that 7.4, the leaders of your dimensions go right through the setting. It's not a really good idea. So what I tend to do is turn on your control points again, select these two, and just grab them out. These are fine because they're not touching, and this one is fine, it's not touching. So if I turn off my do not print, these ones here, they're quite close. You can actually turn on your control points and just drag them out a little bit so they're not touching. And that's it for the dimensioning. Okay, so apart from your linear dimensions, which you guys saw, the other things that you may want is, for example, an aligned dimension. So, for example, I want to dimension this edge here. If you click on that corner, in that corner, you can get that diagonal edge. Other things would be diameter and radius. So the difference between a diameter and a radius is, so you use diameter wherever there is a hole or a disc, so a complete circle. Can be negative space, can be positive space, it doesn't matter. So for example, the ring size, diameter of 16.8 or 17. But if you were doing, for example, this particular arc here, then you would use a radius, because it's not a full circle, it's a portion of a circle. Okay, this is not a perfect round curve, so you can go from one side of 3.8 to another side of 5.2, so you may not want to create a radius for it. So I'll just leave that for now. Is there any other portion of a circle? No. Okay, so we don't have any radius in here that you need to sort of specify. On your handout, you'll notice that under your materials list, you have materials 1, and then you have 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's move that across. Okay. We'll copy them down to create a couple of different options. Okay, if your materials list is growing too large, that is going to be interfering with your perspective, then technically, obviously move it out of the way so it's not too cramped to the edge. In this situation, I'm just going to leave it for now so I can get to the point. So reference 1, reference 2, reference 3. Okay, so let's say number 1 is for the shank, and I'm going to create an arrow here called a leader. Point to that, come up at about 45 degrees, and then have a little horizontal leader coming out at 3 mil. Okay, and then left click on that and then press enter, and it will give you a text box. So we're just going to put 1 as my first reference. The easiest way to do the number 2 and number 3 is I normally just copy them. 2, 3. Okay, so once you've created them, you can select them, turn on your control points. So if 3 is identifying the stone and 2 was identifying the setting, just make sure you point them at the right location. And there's your majority of your thing.